All right, so I'm going to give my thoughts on the market, take them or leave them for what they're worth. So looking at Bitcoin first and foremost, still bullish. We're still trending upwards on the high time frames. Although we are trending sideways long enough that this could just as easily be distribution as it could be accumulation. Though with just the timing of the Bitcoin halving, I do lean more bullish than bearish. And on the low time frames, we had our deviation to the downside. We are still technically trending upwards. Even on the lower time frames, like if we zoomed into the hourly, we still technically have higher lows there and some consolidation. But even if we were to come down to 65K or so, we could put in a higher low and still be fine. I think it's pretty clear that if Bitcoin takes out this range high, starts price exploration, that's extraordinarily bullish, and you should be exposed to the market. So I think there's a case to be made for being somewhat sidelined here and waiting for a breakout in Bitcoin. Although I do think that we could get a little bit of an alt season here, if not a lot of an alt season. So if we look at Bitcoin dominance starting to break down from this ascending wedge, if you will, I hesitate to use TA patterns on Bitcoin dominance and percentage scales or whatever, but we are very long overdue for an alt season and for Bitcoin dominance to drop. And if you look at kind of the fundamentals of why Bitcoin dominance may drop, it's pretty clear that with the Mt. Gox distributions, there's $9 billion plus worth of Bitcoin being distributed. A portion of that's going to be sold for dollars, which is going to be net negative for Bitcoin's price. And then a portion of that's going to be sold for altcoins. It's going to be reinvested into the altcoin market, which is net positive for altcoins. So it just makes sense for, and I'm not saying with this chart that Bitcoin dominance is going to drop all the way back down to multi-year lows, but I wouldn't be surprised if we get at least a correction down to sub 50% or so, unless of course the overall market. And by overall market, I mean TradFi markets tank as well. If we see NASDAQ and the S&P 500 start tanking, then of course some money may flee to Bitcoin from the altcoin markets as a more protective play. So speaking of speaking of the TradFi markets, I should go over TradFi next, but I just want to cover ETH really quickly. It's pretty straightforward. I think we're going to spend some time potentially channeling sideways, making some support or trying to make support on top of 3,700. Look for a breakout to above this 4,000 level. Super basic here, but I am bullish ETH Bitcoin. I just think that ETH makes a lot of sense right now. If you're bullish on crypto, I think it makes sense to position in Ethereum or Solana versus Bitcoin, just with the Mt. Gox distributions that I just explained. You also, if we go down to ETH Bitcoin here, have a pretty big downtrend level that is trying to break out here. So we are a little bit of resistance, but we start printing some candles outside of this downtrend level. We could very easily rotate back up to the top of the range. Something that I always try to reiterate is whenever you have a range, right? Whenever you have a range and you deviate below that range or outside of that range, it becomes very likely that you travel all the way back to the opposite side of the range, right? So we had a pretty clear range down here at, for ETH Bitcoin 0.049. We deviated below and recovered. It's very likely that we at least come back to the midpoint, if not the top of the range. And Bitcoin's the perfect example for that. We just did it. If I can zoom in to Bitcoin here, right? We deviated out of the bottom of the range below that 59K level, and then we rotated all the way back up to the top of our range. And even in the immediate term, we attacked the mid-range, right? Off of that deviation. S&P 500, I know I'm kind of jumping around here. S&P 500, decent risk reward here for longs, to be quite honest, trying to make support on this previous resistance. Pretty straightforward. Flipping support or flipping resistance into support would be very bullish. We're also kind of at an inflection point, to be honest. What I'm not fearful of, but just what you don't want to see happen. Let me actually zoom back into the daily. What would be very bearish is, again, like deviating our range, right? We don't want to deviate that range and fall back down below this previous high. That's pretty bearish. Now, of course, we could get into a situation where we kind of chop and make that ascending, wedge before a larger correction, but we really don't want to see that happen. What we want to see is, make support and continue higher. The other thing that we really don't want to see happen is the divergence, weekly bearish divergence, right? And we're starting to see that form. And the reason I don't want to see weekly bearish divergence form, and what would kind of confirm that to me is that if that, that deviates down, that turns into a deviation and we fall back below our previous high, that would confirm that for me, similar to what we did over here, right? We deviated above, fell back below. Right. Every major recession and or major correction on the S&P 500 is accompanied by weekly bearish divergence. I cannot find, going back for decades and decades and decades, I can't find a single recession or large drawdown that was not accompanied or signaled by weekly bearish divergence. So really want to see the S&P 500 hold this 5,200 level or whatever this was. Yeah, 5,260. So not ideal if we fall down below this. So pretty important level that we're currently at for the S&P 500. Last but not least, I've been pounding the table on gold and silver recently. Not even recently, for a while now. We're on the weekly chart here. I think silver is probably going to $50. I think inflation starting to tick back up. Trueflation up only for, and this isn't, trueflation is not something that I look at the actual specific number. I just look at the trend, right? The trend for May has been that inflation's been rising again, right? So that gives us a little bit of signal of inflation concerns probably not going anywhere anytime soon. We've been talking about this huge, whatever you want to call it, inverse head and shoulders, cup and handle, rounding bottom, whatever you want to call the pattern. It's a bullish pattern, very clearly a bullish pattern, ascending triangle. Oops, that's terribly drawn, but this breakout for silver has been long overdue. Silver targets are pretty high. I think this can squeeze to 50 relatively soon. Same thing with gold. Gold, been bullish on gold and metals for a while. I think gold and silver are probably your best bets as far as inflation hedges go. Not a big fan of Bitcoin as an inflation hedge. I think if you just look at the data, it trades like a tech stock. So why would you try to hedge against inflation with Bitcoin? Makes no sense. Bullish on, for the time being at least, as long as we're kind of above that 16-cent range, bullish on Doge and Shiba Inu, as well as just meme coins in general. You can see I've got the Trump coin chart pulled up. Whoops. My settings here are a little messed up. Get this white background. This is now in price expiration. Maybe we'll go out to the daily. So with the Ethereum ETF approval, ETH meme coins are doing quite well here as ETH goes up in price. We are in price expiration, and when WIF went into price expiration, we saw a 10x off of it. When WIF ran from like 35 cents to $3.50 or 40 cents to $4, we saw a 10x in price from this price expiration level, or this previous high would be roughly like $90 to $110, $120. Not saying that's where Trump's going, but I have very high targets. Been talking about Trump since it was literally 6 cents. Putting out research in Sistine, research in the Sistine research Discord. If you want access to that, head over to sistine.ai so you can get that. Or it runs, 100x. Still think it's a pretty decent play here. I think it's actually the trade of the cycle, Trump token. Still 5 months or so until the election. Still lots of stuff happening with regards to Trump. Back to Dogecoin and Shiba Inu. Shiba Inu being the Ethereum, leading Ethereum meme coin and dog token. But before we jump into Shiba Inu, Dogecoin looking pretty solid here. We saw this nice descending wedge, which is a bullish pattern. On the hourly, we saw it break out. And we also saw the breakout level get retested this morning. And so far it's held. Um, from a higher time frame perspective, this 17.5 cent level is what is kind of, holding us down. I believe once we get through 17.5 cents or so, this thing can run pretty significantly higher to 35 cents rather quickly. But importantly, we are above this kind of 16 cent level, but we are just kind of consolidating in here. And I think, obviously, if the market remains bullish, if crypto remains bullish, then we can zip up to 35 cents. Alternatively, we start breaking down from here. Honestly, it's not looking great, and 10 cents is in play. So, at again a pretty crucial pivot point for Dogecoin on the high time frames. But I do think the high time frames look pretty good, and I also think a Dogecoin ETF filing is very likely in the next year or so, which would obviously make headlines and probably send the coin much higher. Shiba Inu looking pretty solid as well. Nice rounding bottom here, right? Nice rounding bottom. Came through, broke the order books open last night. Making a high around looks like 29.45. But overall, really, really solid. If we can continue to consolidate, I think Shiba Inu has a lot of upside, especially if Ethereum continues to do well. Not much else to it besides that. Obviously, if things take a turn for the worse in the broader markets, yeah, meme coins probably not going to do extraordinarily well. But I do think that meme coins are primed to do decently well with this Mt. Gox distribution. It's big liquidity injection, Ethereum ETF approval. I'm just going to continue to be bullish until proven otherwise on at least the Bitcoin chart. But again, I think I'm bearish Bitcoin dominance. I think alts can do well if Bitcoin just kind of chops sideways in this range for a while. But that being said, we just have no reason, right? We're in this big, bull flag, technically maybe trying to break out of this bull flag, consolidating above it. At minimum, we are in a sideways range with, a series of higher highs and higher lows on the large time frames, right? So I don't think it makes a lot of sense to be bearish at this point in time, given both the chart, the timing of the Bitcoin halving, and the overall market. I mean, the S&P 500, right? It's 1.5% off of all-time highs. Let the bearish signals flow in before flipping bearish, just for the sake of being nervous, right? That's going to round it out, guys. This video is sponsored by RabbitX. Go check out RabbitX if you want to trade perpetuals on a decentralized exchange. I like RabbitX a lot. They've got a lot of options to trade, and they are a great place to farm funding rate. If you don't know how to farm funding rate, you can earn high yields. We do have a funding rate farming guide over at Sistine.ai. So head over to Sistine.ai if you want access to that, as well as the Discord. And then if you're looking for a centralized exchange to trade with leverage on, there's a link in the description below for BingX. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in. Catch you next time. Peace.